2 Apache brides were returned like bad cattle. 1 cowboy refused to send them back. The rope came off the saddle horn, and I held it a minute before I coiled it back up, because my hands needed something to do while I figured out what I was looking at. 2 women Apache, sitting in the dirt outside the Harker barn, not sitting the way people sit when they're waiting on something, sitting the way people sit when they don't know if they're allowed to stand. One had her knees pulled up, arms around them, face down. The other one was watching me with eyes that were done crying, you could tell done for a long time. There was a bruise along her jaw that had gone yellow at the edges. I'd ridden in that morning to pick up a bull I'd bought off Dale Harker the week before. What I'd found was Dale and his 2 brothers, Clem and Roy, and a man I didn't know sitting their horses in front of the barn. The stranger had a gut and a new hat, and the look of a man who drove a wagon of dry goods and thought that gave him rights over everything. Dale said, "Russ, good timing, maybe you can help settle a thing." I asked what thing. "Fella here is Calvin Briggs. He traded for these 2 women off the Mescalero agency last spring. Said they ran off and he tracked them here, wants them back." I looked at Calvin Briggs. Calvin Briggs looked at me the way men with new hats look at men with old hats. "Traded for them," I said. "That's right," Briggs said. "Paid fair value, papers and everything." I looked at the women in the dirt, then back at Briggs. "Where are you taking them?" "Back to my operation up near Tucson. I got a contract feeding rail crews. They cook and wash and earn their keep." Dale said, "See, here's the thing, Russ. I told Briggs they'd been here 2 weeks. He's got a paper. I don't know the law on it, but it looks like a legal thing." Clem nodded along. Roy didn't do much of anything. I set the coiled rope back on my saddle horn. "You're not taking them," I said. Briggs turned in his saddle. "I beg your pardon." I said, "You're not taking them. Get off this property." There was a silence, the kind that has weight. Dale said, "Now, Russ." "Dale, I bought a bull off you last week. I'm going to take the bull and go home. These women are coming with me." I looked at Briggs. "You want to argue it, you come to my place with a badge, not a paper you bought off somebody." Briggs looked at me, and at the rifle leaning against the corral fence 6 feet away, and at whatever he saw in my face. His face went a color I'd seen before in men who weren't used to hearing no. His 2 men looked at each other. Men who hire other men to ride with them are only dangerous when their odds are good. He pulled his horse's head around and rode out without another word. I didn't watch him go. Clem said, "Russ, I don't know what you think you're doing." I said, "I know exactly what I'm doing. That's the difference between me and you, Clem." Dale was quiet. Roy was still quiet. I didn't know Roy well, but I'd always thought Roy was the one in that family with sense, and his silence was a kind of agreement that none of them had the appetite to make this into something bigger than it was. I looked at the women in the dirt. The one with the yellow bruise was still watching me. I said, "I don't know how much of that you understood, but you don't have to stay here." She said something in Apache I didn't catch. Then she stood up and touched the other woman's shoulder, and the other woman lifted her face. She was younger, 16 maybe younger than that. She'd been crying after all, her eyes were red. The older woman helped her up. "My name's Russ Calloway," I said. "I've got a place 8 miles east. You can come or you can go wherever you want. I won't stop you either way." I got the bull out of Harker's pen myself. The women walked behind me to the road, not because I told them to, but because that was the direction they went. I put them up behind me on the spare horse I'd brought. It was a big animal and it could carry them both, and we rode east. Nobody spoke for a long while. The bull walked on a lead rope, and the country was the same country I'd ridden through 100 times, flat and brown going toward a line of cedar, and the sun was coming up behind us and throwing our shadows long ahead. After maybe 2 miles, the older woman said, in English I hadn't expected, "Where are you taking us?" Home, I said, my place. A pause. Why? I thought about that. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because I wanted to give her the right one, not just a convenient one. Because nobody should be treated like what I just saw, I said, and I had the means to stop it. She didn't say anything for a long time after that. Neither did I. The cedar smell came up as we got into the scrub, dry and clean, and a hawk was working a thermal up ahead, turning slow circles. Finally she said, "The other man, the deputy, he would not have stopped Briggs." "No," I said. "But you did." "Yes." She seemed to be turning that over. I let her turn it. "I want to tell you about the place before I tell you what happened there, because the place matters." I'd had the Callaway spread for 11 years by that summer. 160 acres of grass and cedar scrub along a creek called Antler Creek, which was a foolish name for a creek, but that's what the man who filed before me had called it, and I'd never thought to change it. I ran maybe 200 head of cattle, which was right at the edge of what one man could manage well, and I was one man. Had been for a long time. I'd had a wife once. Her name was Addie. She died of fever in the winter of '71, which was 8 years before that summer, and I will say this about her and then not dwell on it. She was a better person than me in most ways, and her dying was a wrong that the world never corrected. I don't think about correcting it because you can't. I think about it sometimes, the way you think about a missing tooth. You know where it was. You know the shape of the space. Since Addie, I had the house, which was a 4-room adobe with a good roof. I had a bunkhouse that was empty. I had a cook shed that I used for exactly that, cooking, alone, things that sustained me and nothing more. I had the barn, the corral, a good well, and a garden plot I kept because Addie had taught me how, and because a man who doesn't grow his own food is always at somebody else's mercy. The garden was the hardest thing to keep up. The cattle I kept because I had to or I'd lose money. The fences I kept because if I didn't the cattle would wander. The house I kept because a man who lets the roof go will stand in rain one winter and never stop regretting it. But the garden nobody but me would notice if it went to nothing. I kept it for myself. Something about growing a thing that fed you. Something about putting your hands in the dirt and watching what came up. Addie had said once that a man who could grow food was a man who couldn't be entirely beaten, and I'd turned that over enough times that it had worn smooth. That was the place. The women rode in behind me and I showed them the bunkhouse and told them that was theirs alone. I don't know what they made of the word alone. The older woman looked at the room, the 2 bunks, the window, the solid door with a bolt on the inside. She tried the bolt, pushed it across and pulled it back, pushed it again. She turned around and said, "Nolly." I said, "I don't know that word." She put her hand on her own chest. "Nolly, this is my name." I tried it. Said it right the second time. I could tell by the small nod. She gestured at the younger woman. She is called Kai." Kai was looking at the floor. I figured I'd give her a long time before I expected anything from her. "I'm glad to have you here," I said to Nolly. "You'll eat at the house. You don't have to work. I want to say that first. You don't owe me work. If you want to help, I'll be glad of it, but you owe me nothing." Nolly listened to this with her head slightly tilted, the way a person listens when they're translating as they go. "What does Briggs do?" she said, "when he comes back?" "If he comes back with a badge and a real court order, I'll deal with it then," I said. "But he's not a lawman and he doesn't have the law with him. He has a paper he bought and a hat." She looked at me a moment longer. "I've been handling men like Briggs my whole life," I said. She didn't say yes or no. She closed the bunkhouse door and I heard the bolt slide. I didn't sleep much the first few nights. I've got a rifle that I've kept by my bed since Addie died, not out of fear but out of habit, the way you keep a tool close to hand. Those first nights I kept it loaded and leaned against the nightstand, and I'd lie awake and listen to the quiet. I'm not a man who startles easy, but I'll tell you this. Knowing 2 women were sleeping 100 feet away under my protection, it changed the texture of the darkness. Not bad, just different, like the air had more in it, more to account for. I'd lie there and run through the things that needed doing, repairs on the north fence line, the bull that needed working in the pen, the water situation in the south pasture come July. And underneath all of it would be this low awareness, like a lamp in an adjoining room, that there were people here who had nobody else. I'd chosen that, done it deliberately, eyes open, and I'd do it again. But it was a weight I felt, and I think feeling a weight honestly is how you carry it right. By the 3rd morning, Nolly was in my garden before I was. I came out for the day's first chores and found her pulling weeds out of the bean rows, slow and methodical, and she didn't look up when I walked over. I stood there a minute. "You don't have to do that," I said. "You said I don't owe you work," she said. "This is not for you." I waited for an explanation, and it didn't come. I found out later, weeks later, when she trusted me enough to explain things, that she'd grown up with a garden, that her mother had kept one. That pulling weeds was something her hands knew how to do in the dark, and it settled her. She wasn't working for me. She was doing the thing that reminded her she was still herself. I understood that. I had my own version of it. Mine was the morning ritual of checking the cattle, riding the fence line, counting heads, looking for the lame one or the sick one before it got worse. My hands knew how to do it, and doing it made me feel like I was still the same man who'd come to this land 11 years before with 2 horses and a bedroll and a plan. A man who was still capable, still in command of something. Kai was harder to understand at first, because for the first week she barely appeared. She'd come to meals, eat what I put down, and go back to the bunkhouse. I didn't push. I'd been undone before, and I knew the shape of it, how you have to get small for a while before you can get big again. On the 8th or 9th day, I was splitting wood out by the barn, and I heard a sound behind me. Kai was standing at the corner of the barn with a hatchet I hadn't given her, which she'd found in the shed. She was looking at the wood pile. I stepped back from the block. "You want to split some?" She didn't answer, but she walked to the block and split a piece of cedar, clean through, and then another, and she kept going for about 20 minutes and then set the hatchet down and walked away. She hadn't said a word. That was fine. The next day she was there again, without asking. After a week she was splitting wood every morning, and she was good at it, reading the grain, setting the hatchet, following through. I found out eventually she'd been doing it since she was small enough that the hatchet was too heavy for her. Those small facts, how she learned to split wood, who taught Nolly to garden, where they'd come from, arrived one at a time over weeks and months. Neither of them told their story all at once, and I didn't ask them to. I just kept the meals regular, and the place warm and the bolt oiled on the bunkhouse door. The thing with Briggs came back around the 3rd week. He didn't come alone. He came with 2 men and a county sheriff's deputy named Cord that I'd had dealings with before, not bad dealings, just dealings. Cord was a fair man, more or less, but he did what the sheriff told him, and the sheriff in that county worked for the men who had money. They rode in at mid-morning. I was at the corral working the new bull. I saw them coming and I let them come. Cord said, "Russ, Mr. Briggs here has filed a complaint with the county, says you have 2 women who belong to him." "Women don't belong to anybody," I said, "not in this country." "He's got a labor contract, Russ. It's got signatures. Apache women can't sign a binding contract in this territory, and everybody in this county knows it. Whatever he's got is paper he drew up himself." Briggs said, "You have no right." "I have every right," I said. "I was talking to Cord, not to Briggs. Those women came here willing and they stay willing. They're free to go any time they want. You want to go talk to them, go ahead, but you're not taking them without they say so themselves." Cord looked uncomfortable. That was normal for Cord. Briggs said, I'll have you up before a judge." "Go ahead," I said. "Bring a judge, I'll be here." There was a long pause. One of Briggs's men shifted in his saddle. The horse under me felt it, and I kept him easy with my knees. Nolly had come out of the garden. I hadn't told her to, and I didn't turn around to look, but I could feel her behind me still, just watching. The way you can feel a wall behind you in the dark. Solid. Present. Cord said, "Russ, I can't make them go if they don't want to go. That's the truth of it." "I know it is," I said. "So does he." Briggs looked at me, and at the rifle leaning against the corral fence 6 feet away, and at whatever he saw in my face. His 2 men looked at each other. Men who hire other men to ride with them are only dangerous when their odds are good. Cord said, "Mr. Briggs, I don't think I can compel." Briggs pulled his horse around and left without another word. His men went with him. Cord waited until they were gone. Then he said, "Russ, I'm just telling you." "He's not done." "Neither am I," said. Cord nodded once slow and rode out. After the dust settled, I turned around. Nolly was standing 10 feet behind me, arms at her sides. She'd seen the whole thing. "That's twice now," she said. "Yes. He'll come a 3rd time with something harder." "Probably," I said. She looked at me the way she sometimes did, like she was reading something in a language she'd learned late, taking each word careful. Then she turned and walked back to the garden. "I want to tell you about an evening in late July, because it's the one I think about most often, looking back." The days had settled into something. Nolly and I had talked enough by then that we could have a real conversation, not just the useful basics. Her English was better than she'd first let on. She'd been around white settlements long enough to pick it up, but she'd held it back until she trusted me, and I understood that too. You don't give a man all your tools until you know what he'll use them for. Kai talked more now. Not a lot, but enough. She had a quick mind that surprised me. She'd ask a question about something she'd observed, the way the well worked or the way I set fence posts, and then she'd think about the answer and ask a follow-up question that was better than the first. Smart girl. She was 16, I'd figured right, and she'd been pulled out of her home community 2 years before by Briggs and a man who'd been operating with him, and whatever had happened to her in those 2 years, she'd gotten through it without losing herself, which was the only thing I could think about when I thought about it. I tried not to think about it much because I couldn't correct it. What I could do was give her steady ground under her feet, regular work, regular meals, nobody asking anything of her except what she chose to give. People who have been taken badly either close up or give too much, trying to earn their safety by being useful. Kai had gone the closed-up direction, and I thought that was probably right of her. Let her open up when she decided to, at her own rate. That evening in late July, I'd cooked beef stew, and the 3 of us ate at the table outside because the air was cooler there, and the sky had gone that color it goes in the desert, red and orange down low and a deep blue straight overhead, and the first stars were coming in. Nolly said, "You had a wife." It wasn't a question. "Yes," I said. "How long ago?" 8 years. She looked at the sky. "You don't want another wife." I didn't say that. She turned and looked at me the way she'd looked at me the first day, from the dirt, taking a true measure. Something about having weathered the Briggs visit and the worry of those early weeks had shifted the kind of attention we gave each other. We were still careful, but we were not strangers anymore. "Why do you do this?" she said. "Keep us here, protect us. There is no profit in it." I thought about that for a while. The stew was going cold. "Because you were in my line of sight," I said, "and I knew what was happening and I could do something about it. There are many men who see wrong things and do nothing." "I know it. But you are not those men." I didn't answer that. It didn't need one. Kai was looking at the stars. She said something in Apache and Nolly answered her, and they went back and forth for a minute, and I didn't try to follow it. I ate my stew and listened to their voices, the cadence of it and the crickets starting up along the creek. Then Kai said, in English carefully, like she'd been storing the words, he says in our stories there are men who protect the people, not family. Just people. I looked at her. She was still looking at the stars. What do they call those men? I asked. She said a word in Apache. Then, it means something like a man who makes a border, a line where the bad thing stops. I didn't say anything for a minute. I don't know if I'm that, I said finally. Kai looked at me. You drew the line, she said. In the dirt, in front of Briggs and the other men, you drew it. Then she went back to the stars. I sat there with that for a while. Something about the way she said it, plain, factual, like she was reading a thing off a page, got into me and stayed. I'm not a man who needs much in the way of recognition, but that was not recognition. That was a girl who'd been treated like property telling me I was something different. And I felt it somewhere down under the ribs, where those things land. August came in hot, the way August does in that country. The kind of heat that gets into the walls of the house and stays there. I was working sunup to about 2 in the afternoon, and then waiting out the worst of it in whatever shade I could find. Nolly had taken over the garden completely by then, not because I'd asked her to. She'd reorganized it, moved the bean rows, added a section of squash, got into the creek bottom and brought up wild onions that she transplanted into a corner of the plot. The garden produced better than it ever had when I was tending it alone, and I'd been tending it for 11 years, so that said something. I'd have told her that, and she'd have looked at me with that level look and said something like, "You watered when you remembered." Which would have been fair. There was something in watching her in that garden that I'm going to try to describe right because I don't want to say it wrong. It wasn't soft. She wasn't a soft woman. She was a woman who'd buried a husband and survived 2 years of Briggs and come out of all of that with herself still intact, her spine still in the right place, her eyes still straight. Watching her move through the rows, efficient, purposeful, knowing exactly what needed doing and doing it, it was something like watching a good horse work, or a man who's done a job so long it's part of him. It was competence. And there is nothing on earth I respect more than competence. Kai had a horse by August. I'd been meaning to put together the spare horse with a proper saddle and just hadn't gotten to it. And one afternoon I came back from checking fence line and Kai had gone ahead and done it herself. Found the old saddle in the tack room, cleaned the leather, fitted the blanket. She was riding the horse in a slow circle in the pasture like she'd been riding it for years, which maybe she had before everything. "Where'd you learn to read a saddle fit?" I called to her. She said, "My uncle." That was the most I'd heard about her life before, so I left it there. There was a neighbor of mine, Tom Akeson, ran cattle about 4 miles north. Good man. He came over one afternoon in late August with his wife, Dora, who was a sharp-tongued woman in the best way. She said true things and said them clearly, which I'd always admired. Tom had heard about the situation and come to make sure I was all right. He shook my hand and looked at the place and said, "You're managing." "I'm managing fine." "People are talking," he said, not as a warning, more like a report. "Let them," I said. "Some of them are talking good," he said. "More than you'd think, the Peters family, old Wardlow from the South Valley, a few of the smaller operations." He shrugged. "They're not going to stand up about it publicly, but they're not against you." I hadn't thought much about who was and wasn't against me. I'd thought about Briggs and the law and the practical problem, not the politics of what the valley made of my choices. I suppose that's the difference between a man who does what he thinks is right and a man who does what he thinks will be approved of. The second man gets more sleep in the short run and less in the long. Dora had gone straight to the garden where Nolly was working. I could hear them talking, Dora asking questions and Nolly answering, and then Dora laughing at something, a real laugh, not a polite one. Tom said, "Briggs has been talking to Whitfield." Whitfield was the county commissioner, a large man with large ambitions and not a lot of scruple. I figured, I said. He's trying to put together something with the land office. Some argument about unsanctioned persons living on your property. They're looking for an angle. They'll keep looking, I said. Tom studied me. You know this could get worse. I know it. And you're staying on it. I am. He nodded. We stood there watching Dora and Nolly in the garden. Dora was crouched down looking at the squash with genuine interest. Nolly was pointing at something and talking, and Dora was listening the way people listen when they're actually learning something. Tom said quietly, "That's a remarkable woman." I didn't answer. "I'm just saying," he said. "I hear you," I said. He left it there, which was why I'd always gotten along with Tom Akeson. The legal trouble came in September. I'll compress it because the details are tedious, and I lived through them once and don't need to live through them again. A man came from the county land office with a letter about legal occupancy and unregistered persons, and several other phrases that amounted to, "You have people on your land who somebody powerful wants gone." I wrote back with the help of a lawyer in Tucson, a young man named Vargas who charged me less than he should have because he thought the case was right. We pushed back with things about free persons, about labor contracts that couldn't be enforced, about a man named Calvin Briggs who had his own dealings with the law that he didn't want examined too closely. Vargas found that out. What Vargas found was this. Briggs had been operating a version of the same scheme at 3 agencies across the territory. He'd found men at the agencies willing to take a payment and provide documentation, paper that looked legal from a distance, paper with the right stamps and the right language, paper that was worth nothing in a real court, but enough to keep women from fighting back when they didn't know they could. He'd been running this for 6 years. 6 years, and the reason it had gone on that long was the same reason most bad things go on. Nobody with the power to stop it had bothered to look. Vargas looked, and then Vargas wrote letters to people who had to respond to letters, because that was the law, whatever else the law was. It took 3 months all told. 3 months of letters and waiting and a kind of low-grade tension I kept to myself mostly, because Nolly and Kai didn't need to carry it. I told Nolly the truth because she asked directly and she deserved it, and she listened to the whole of it without a flicker on her face and then said, "What is the worst thing that happens?" I said, "Worst thing is I lose the property, but I don't think it comes to that." She looked at me, "If it comes to that, then I'll deal with it," I said, "but it won't." She held my look for a long moment. Then she nodded, not the kind that means I agree, but the kind that means I believe you. And I felt that down in the chest. That somebody was trusting me to hold the line. Not because they had no choice. She'd said herself she had people she could go back to. She was trusting me because she'd read me right. There is no currency like being trusted by someone who has reason not to. I spent those 3 months keeping the operation running, keeping the meals regular, keeping the fence lines tight, keeping my mouth shut in town about things that could be used against me. There's a version of that kind of trouble where you fight loud in public, and sometimes that's right. This wasn't that kind. This was the kind where you keep your head down and let your lawyer work and don't give anybody anything to point at. It wore on me in ways I didn't admit to anybody, including myself at the time. I'd lie awake some nights running the same calculations I'd run before, what I could lose, what I couldn't afford to lose, what I'd do if it came to the worst of it. The answer to the last question was always the same. I'd deal with it, but not knowing which version of dealing with it I'd need, that wore on a man. Nolly knew. She didn't ask and I didn't offer, but she knew the way women know things, the small shifts in how a man moves around his own house when something's sitting on him. She didn't try to talk me out of it. She didn't offer consolations or reassurances that might have been false. She just kept the kitchen running and the house warm and was present in the way that a steady person is present when the ground is uncertain. That was its own kind of holding the line. Kai, for her part, worked harder during those weeks. Not dramatically. Just an extra hour at the end of the day, things done before I'd thought to ask. She was paying it back, the only way she knew how, and I let her because telling her not to would have been taking something from her. I lost some business in that time. 2 men who'd been buying cattle from me stopped coming around. I found other buyers. A man who can't find other buyers in a territory full of men who eat beef is a man who isn't trying. Briggs disappeared from the picture in October. Vargas heard from people he knew that Briggs had left the territory entirely. New Mexico, then maybe Colorado. I don't know where he went and I didn't ask. The letter from the county came in November. The matter was resolved. The occupancy complaint was dismissed. I read it standing at the table, and then I folded it and put it in the box where I keep things that matter. The deed to the land is in that box. The last letter Addie wrote me before the fever finished the job. A note from a judge who'd cleared my name in a dispute 20 years ago. And now this. At lunch I set the plates down and said, "The county dropped the complaint. We're done with it." Nolly put down her fork. She looked at me. "Done," she said. "Done," I said. "Briggs is out of the territory. Vargas says nobody else has standing to come after you." Kai said something in Apache. Nolly answered without looking away from me. Then Kai got up and came back with 3 tin cups and the whiskey I kept for medicinal purposes, and she set 1 cup in front of each of us with the seriousness of a girl performing a ceremony, which I suppose she was. I poured, we drank. The whiskey was bad, but the company was right. I want to tell you about the day things changed between Nolly and me, because this story is not only about protecting somebody. I've been telling it that way, and that's true, but it's not the whole truth. It was a morning in October, before the legal thing was resolved, but after I'd started to believe it would be. Cold now, the first cold of the season, that clean bite in the air that tells you summer is gone. I was out at the corral before first light working with a young horse I'd bought, a black gelding that was skittish and needed time. I heard the door of the bunkhouse. Nolly came across the yard in the dark, wrapped in a blanket, and she stood at the corral fence and watched me work. I kept working, she kept watching. After a while she said, "He trusts you now." I said, "Almost." "Yesterday he didn't." "No," I said, "yesterday he didn't." She was quiet for a bit. The gelding moved and I moved with him, keeping the pressure steady. You can't rush a horse like that. You can only be patient enough that they come to believe you're worth trusting. "My husband was like this with horses," she said, "patient." She'd mentioned a husband once before. I hadn't asked about it. "What happened to him?" I said. It was a minute before she answered. "He died 4 years ago, a sickness that came through the camp." She watched the horse move. "He was a good man, quiet like you. He didn't talk much, but everything he did was right." I brought the gelding to a stop and stood with him. "I'm sorry," I said. "Yes." She pulled the blanket closer. "After he died, I had no one close enough to protect me from what happened. Briggs and men like him, they look for women alone. Women who have no man to draw the line." She said that last part in Apache, the phrase Kai had used weeks before. "You are not alone now," I said. It was a plain thing to say. I didn't dress it up. But she looked at me across the corral fence in the early dark, and the word between us then was not about safety or shelter. I don't know if I can explain what it was. It was about being seen by someone. Really seen, not the sad widower, not the stubborn cowboy who made trouble for Briggs. Just a man, standing there with a horse in the early cold, who meant what he said. She said, "No, I am not alone now." And she went back inside. I stood there with the gelding for a long time after that. He'd gone quiet too, his head down, breathing easy. The sky had gone from black to that dark blue that comes just before the gray, and somewhere along the creek a bird was starting up, 1 note, then 2, then the whole tentative morning racket. I thought about the men who would call what I'd done foolish. The ones who'd have done the calculation, trouble, cost, risk, and turned away from Harker's barn without a second look. They were not bad men, most of them. They were careful men. And there's a version of being careful that is just a polished word for afraid. I was not afraid of Calvin Briggs. I was not afraid of the county land office. I had been afraid of other things in my life. The fever that took Addie, the year the drought nearly broke me, the winter the creek froze solid and I lost cattle I couldn't afford to lose. Fear of things that couldn't be argued with or stood down. That kind of fear I understood. But a man with a bad paper and a new hat, no. I thought, this is the thing, whatever else happens. This is what I was here for. Winter came in hard that year. First snow in early December, which wasn't unusual, but it was early, and it stayed. The 4-room house was warmer than the bunkhouse, and I'd known that was going to be a problem once the cold really settled. I didn't want to make it strange. There was nothing strange about it, nothing that needed to be made strange, so I just walked over one morning and said, "I've got 2 rooms sitting empty. They're heated. It's up to you." Kai moved her things that afternoon. Nolly waited another 2 days, which was her way. She didn't do things until she decided to do them. And then she moved her things on a Wednesday morning in the snow, and I helped her carry the bunkhouse blankets across to the house. We didn't talk much doing it. There wasn't much to say. Kai made herself at home the way young people do. She was into everything within a week, found the old checkerboard in the back room, taught herself the rules from watching me and Tom Akeson play on his last visit. She beat me twice in the same evening and wasn't modest about it. "You take too long on your moves," she said. "I'm thinking," I said. "You're not thinking, you're hoping it changes." She was 16. She had no business being that right. Nolly was different. She moved through the house quietly, with a care that had respect in it, not the kind of care that means she was afraid to take up space, but the kind that means she understood what space she was in. She'd been running her own household. She knew how a house worked. She started cooking. I don't mean helping. I mean she took the kitchen and she ran it, and what came off that stove was not what I had been putting on my table for 8 years. There is a thing she made with dried venison and wild onions from the garden, and something else I never identified, some herb she'd found along the creek, that I ate 3 times in a week and would have eaten every day. I told her that and she said, "You were eating badly before." "I know it," I said. "A man who eats badly works badly." "I know that too. So now you'll work better." I said, "Yes, ma'am," and she gave me that look, and I thought something I hadn't thought in a long time. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't sudden. It was the slow kind of thing, like water finding its level, like a door that's been off its hinge getting set right. A rightness that you feel before you have words for it. It was a night in January. A cold night, the coldest we'd had, the kind where the wind comes down off the mountain and finds every crack in the wall. Kai had gone to bed early. I was at the table with the lantern and the account books, end-of-year tallying, which is dull work, and Nolly was sewing something near the stove. We didn't talk for a long time. We didn't need to. There was nothing wrong with the silence. It was the kind you have to earn. It takes months of somebody being in a house before you can be quiet with them without it being uncomfortable, and we'd earned it, the 3 of us, slow and sure. The lamp burned low. I trimmed the wick without getting up, the way you get good at when you spend years alone. After a while she set the sewing down. "Russ," she said. I looked up. She was looking at me with that direct, undecorated look. That was the most honest thing I'd ever been on the receiving end of. "I want to stay," she said. "Not because I have no place to go. I have a place. I could go back to my people. I have family there." She paused. "I want to stay because I want to be here, with you, in this house." I set the pen down. "Kai," I said. Kai makes her own choice, but I think she wants to stay. She is learning things here. She is becoming what she was meant to become before all that. You have done that for her. I didn't know what to do with that. It was the kind of thing you carry. I said, I want you to stay. She nodded, not the believing nod, a different one, the one that means good. Then, my people have a way of marking it, a marriage. It's not the white man's way, but it's mine. I would want to do it the right way. I said, tell me what the right way is. She did. It was simpler than I'd expected, and it was exactly right. I said, then that's what we'll do. She picked up the sewing again. I went back to the accounts. Outside, the wind was hitting the walls hard, but the walls held. The lamp held its light. I sat there for a long time with that, what she'd said and what I'd said, and the wind, and the numbers in the book in front of me. A man who had lived alone for 8 years. I knew every sound that house made in the dark, the particular creak of the third board in the hallway, the way the stovepipe ticked as it cooled, the sound the window frame made when the north wind found the gap at the corner. I'd cataloged all of it, the way you catalog sounds when you're the only person who's ever going to hear them. When you're not listening for company, you're just listening to confirm you're still there. Now the sounds were different. There were footsteps I hadn't put there. There was a lamp in Kai's room sometimes when I passed the hall. There was the small sound of Nolly's breathing when she was asleep, which I could not hear from my room, but I was aware of all the same. It sounds like not much. But when you've been alone as long as I'd been, the small sounds of other people in a house are the whole world. I worked through the column of numbers until they added up, and they did. I should tell you about the spring, because the spring was when things finally sat still and I could look at what I had. The legal business was settled. Briggs was gone. The valley had reckoned with what I'd done and reckoned different ways. Some men kept their distance, which was fine. I'd never needed their company. A couple came around eventually, not to apologize but to buy cattle, which amounted to the same thing. Tom Akeson was steady throughout. Dora brought Nolly seeds from her own garden in March, wrapped in cloth and labeled in her careful handwriting, squash, pepper, a variety of bean Nolly hadn't grown before. The preacher in town was neutral in the way that means he didn't approve but didn't have the spine to say so openly. I heard once from a man in the feed store that there had been talk that some people said I'd put the county's peace at risk, that I'd invited trouble, that a man with better judgment would have stayed out of it and let the law sort itself. I thought about that for a minute. Then I stopped thinking about it. There was also a man named Peters, who ran the dry goods store in town, who shook my hand one afternoon in March and said he'd heard the whole story and I'd done right. Said his father had come out of Missouri with nothing, and somebody had stood for him once when they didn't have to. Said he didn't forget things like that. I didn't need Peters to tell me I'd done right, but it didn't hurt to hear it. What I noticed most that spring was how the place felt different. Not noisier, it was never a loud place, but fuller. There were 2 horses in the corral instead of 1. The garden ran past the old stakes I'd set years before. There was smoke from the kitchen at hours when there hadn't been smoke before. Small things, but a property is made of small things, and the small things had changed. The cattle were in better shape too, I'll say that plainly. Having a second pair of eyes on the land, Kai riding the south fence, Nolly watching the creek in flood season, both of them noticing things I'd stopped noticing because you go blind to your own property after enough years, it made the operation better. I'd run 200 head alone for a decade. By the next fall I was running 260 with less trouble, not more. A man who says he doesn't need anybody is usually a man who's never had the right people around. Kai was riding every morning by then, the spare horse moving like it was born for her, and she'd gotten into the habit of checking the south fence line on her morning ride, which saved me an hour every other day. She didn't say she was doing it for me. She just did it. There was one afternoon, I can still feel the particular weight of it, where I came in from a long day checking the spring pasture, and Nolly was in the garden with Kai, the two of them working side by side. And the sun was low and warm, and the creek was running good, and the whole place looked like what it was supposed to look like. Something that had been empty for 8 years and was not empty anymore. I stood at the gate and watched them. Kai was talking. She talked more now, easy and free, and she was laughing at something she'd said, and Nolly laughed too, that laugh she had that I'd heard for the first time that night in July when Dora had said something funny. They hadn't seen me yet. I thought about Addie. I think about Addie still, the way I said the missing tooth, the shape of the space. But there's something I've learned in the years since, and this is it. A space made by losing something good does not have to stay empty to honor what was lost. I don't believe that anymore. I believe that honoring the dead means living right. That Addie, if she could have seen that afternoon, would have approved of every piece of it. Maybe that's just something I tell myself. Maybe it's true. I think it's true. Nolly looked up and saw me at the gate. She didn't wave or call out. She just looked at me the way she looked at me, that straight, clear look, and there was something in it I still don't have a good word for. Not love, or not only that. Recognition, maybe. Like she was confirming something she'd already decided. Like she was saying, yes, that one, still that one. Then she went back to the garden. I came through the gate and walked across the yard and went in and started heating water, because it had been a long day and we'd eat soon, and that was the day. We married in April, Nolly and I in the Apache way, with 2 of her family members who came down from the reservation for it. I'd met them once before, briefly, in March, her brother, a quiet man named Hostin who shook my hand once and then watched me for 2 days before deciding I was acceptable. Her aunt, an older woman who said almost nothing to me but fed me something she'd brought from the camp and watched to see if I'd eat it, which I did, because it was good. Hostin and I talked some, the second evening of his March visit. He spoke careful English, choosing his words like a man who's been burned before by saying a thing that gets misunderstood. He asked me about the land, how long I'd held it, what I ran on it. He asked about the legal trouble and I told him straight, and he listened to the whole of it without expression, and at the end he said, "You did not have to take this trouble." "No," I said. "But you did." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment, then, "My sister is not easy." "I know it," I said. "She will tell you when you are wrong." "She already has," I said. "She was right." Something shifted in his face, not a smile exactly, an acknowledgement. "She was right about you too," he said, and that was the end of it. In April he came back for the wedding with the aunt, and this time he brought a blanket he'd made himself, which Nolly later told me was a serious thing, not something given lightly. I still have it. It's on the chair in the corner of the bedroom and I've never moved it. Kai stood with us. Tom and Dora came, which was a kindness. We ate outside because the day was clear and warm, the first real warm day of the year, and somebody, Dora, I think, had brought bread, and Nolly's aunt had brought things I didn't have names for, and Tom had brought a bottle of something better than my medicinal whiskey. And for an afternoon, the table outside the house had more on it and more around it than it had held in a very long time. I sat at the end of that table and looked at it all, the food, the people, the late afternoon light coming low across the garden, Kai saying something to Hostin in Apache that made him almost smile, Dora and Nolly talking like women who have known each other longer than they have, Tom catching my eye across the table and giving me the small nod that men give each other when something has come out right. I looked at all of it, and I thought about the morning I'd ridden to Harker's to buy a bull. 11 months, that's all it had been. 11 months from that morning to this afternoon. From the rope in my hands and the women in the dirt to this table, and this light, and this woman sitting 3 feet away from me who had looked at me from the dirt and held my eye and decided I was worth the risk of trusting. That's a lot of living in 11 months. Most years don't hold that much. After her family had gone and Tom and Dora had ridden home and Kai had gone inside, Nolly and I sat on the bench outside the house in the dark. She said, "You are thinking something." "I'm thinking I didn't know any of this was coming," I said. "No. I rode to Dale Harker's place to buy a bull." She laughed a quiet laugh. "And you got more than a bull," she said. "I got considerably more than a bull," I said. We sat there. The stars were the way they are in April, thick and low, and the creek was running and the cattle were quiet out in the pasture. The black gelding was moving somewhere in the dark beyond the corral fence, slow footsteps in the grass. Nolly put her hand over mine on the bench. Not dramatic, just there. The way you set a thing down you've been carrying a while and are glad to put down. I turned my hand over and I held hers. She said, "You drew a line that day." "Yes," I said. "And everything came through the line." I thought about that. "Yeah," I said, "everything worth keeping." We sat there until the chill came, and then we went inside, and the door closed behind us, and the lamp was warm on the table, and the house held the heat the way a good house does. There are things I could have done differently, looking back, things I might have said sooner or said better, times in those months when the weight of the trouble sat on me and I got quiet in ways that probably weren't fair to the people under my roof. I'm not a perfect man. I never claimed it. But I'll tell you what I did right. I saw two women sitting in the dirt like they had no value in this world, and I knew that was wrong, and I did something about it. I held the line every time somebody pushed on it. I kept the place solid and the meals regular and the bolt oiled on the door. I let them come at their own pace, and I didn't make them feel like a debt. And I was honest when it came to the thing that mattered most. That's what I did right. And everything worth keeping came through the line. That was exactly that.